Feeling overwhelmed, stressed, like life's moving too fast? Take a breath, take 5 minutes, and take stock of all you have to be grateful for. I'm Olivia, and I invite you to join me for 5 Minutes of Gratitude, the podcast that transforms your outlook in the time it takes to drink your morning coffee. Together, we'll explore the power of thankfulness. From life's big blessings to its smallest joys, we'll discover how gratitude can change everything. 5 Minutes of Gratitude, because a thankful heart is a happy heart. Follow 5 Minutes of Gratitude now, wherever you get your podcasts, and let's start our gratitude journey together.
Tired of doom scrolling? Time for a dose of awesome. 5 Good News Stories is your happy place, where underdogs become champions, crossing guards become legends, and impossible dreams come true. We're serving up 5 fresh reasons to believe in humanity. From world records to cute animal stories, to that guy who turned his pizza shop into a homeless shelter. These are the stories that'll make you go, wait, what? That's amazing! Ready for your good news fix? Follow 5 Good News Stories wherever you get your podcasts, because let's face it, we could all use more awesome in our lives. The number 5 Good News Stories.
Calaroga Shark Media.
The final days of John Paul II's papacy cast a somber shadow over Vatican City. By early 2005, the once vigorous Pope, who had travelled to 129 countries, was confined to the Apostolic Palace. His body visibly weakened by what many believe to be Parkinson's disease, an illness the Vatican never officially confirmed during his lifetime, though his personal physician would acknowledge it after his death. The man who had stared down dictators and helped change the face of Europe could barely speak above a whisper. Yet millions around the world watched as he continued to lead the Church from a position of increasing frailty, his suffering on public display. This is White Smoke, Episode 9. The Death of John Paul II and the Quiet Succession. On February 24, 2005, John Paul II was rushed to Gemelli Hospital with respiratory distress, a complication from flu-related breathing difficulties, likely exacerbated by dysphagia, a swallowing disorder commonly associated with Parkinson's disease. This was not his first hospitalization. He had undergone surgery after the 1981 assassination attempt and had been treated for a bowel tumor in 1992. But at 84, his deteriorating health created a sense of foreboding throughout the Catholic world. Vatican officials downplayed the severity of his condition, but medical experts noted the particular dangers of respiratory infections in patients with his symptoms. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, the Pope's closest theological advisor and head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, began quietly reviewing the protocols for papal transition. As Dean of the College of Cardinals, the 77-year-old German theologian would be responsible for guiding the Church during the interregnum and organizing the conclave to elect a successor. While the Vatican publicly expressed optimism about the Pope's recovery, behind the scenes, preparations for the inevitable were underway. We could see the end approaching, Cardinal Joachim Meisner of Cologne later recalled, but no one wanted to speak of it openly. This was the Pope who had defined Catholicism for a generation. How do you prepare to lose such a figure? John Paul II returned to the Vatican on March 13th, appearing briefly at his apartment window to bless the faithful in St. Peter's Square. His inability to speak, he managed only to raise his hand in blessing, shocked many who had not fully grasped the extent of his decline. Vatican spokesman Joaquin Navarro Valls, who had served the Pope for 21 years, struggled to maintain his composure during press briefings. The Pope, who had communicated so effectively throughout his pontificate, was now rendered nearly mute. On March 27th, Easter Sunday, John Paul II appeared at his window for the Urbi et Orbi blessing. In a heartbreaking moment broadcast worldwide, he tried to speak but could not produce words. His visible frustration as he struggled to address the faithful became one of the most poignant moments of his papacy. Cardinal Camillo Ruini, the Pope's vicar for Rome, later described it as the most powerful sermon he ever gave, one without words. The College of Cardinals now faced an unprecedented situation. Modern medicine had extended the Pope's life, but his ability to govern the Church was increasingly compromised. The last Pope to resign had been Celestine V in 1294, and John Paul II had made it clear he considered his office a lifelong commitment. The cardinals could only wait and pray as the Pope's condition deteriorated. On March 31st, the Vatican announced that the Pope was receiving antibiotics for a urinary tract infection. His condition deteriorated rapidly as septic shock set in. By April 1st, Vatican officials described his condition as very grave. Archbishop Stanisław Dziwisz, his longtime secretary who had been at his side for 40 years, later conveyed that the Pope had reportedly said, "Let me go to the house of the Father," though there is no official confirmation these were his exact final words. His final hours were spent with his closest aides in his papal apartment. On April 2nd, at 9:37 in the evening, Pope John Paul II died in his papal apartment. Bells throughout Rome began to toll, their somber resonance announcing to the city and the world that the third longest pontificate in history had come to an end. In St. Peter's Square, a crowd of over 60,000 people had gathered in silent vigil. When Cardinal Ruini announced the Pope's death, many fell to their knees in prayer while others openly wept. Archbishop Leonardo Sandri, the Vatican's substitute Secretary of State, delivered the official announcement to the crowd. Our Holy Father John Paul II has returned to the house of the Father. Around the world, television networks interrupted their programming. World leaders issued statements of condolence. Even in countries with small Catholic populations, the death of this Pope was treated as a global event of historic significance. Cardinal Ratzinger, now officially the Camerlengo of the Holy Roman Church, entered the papal apartment to perform the ancient ritual confirming the Pope's death. He called the Pope's baptismal name 3 times, Carol, 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 and receiving no response declared, "The Pope is truly dead." He then broke the fisherman's ring, the symbol of papal authority, ensuring that no documents could be falsely sealed during the vacant seat. Within hours, the Vatican's well-rehearsed protocols swung into action. The Pope's body was prepared for public viewing by the morticians of Rome's San Camillo Hospital. No autopsy was performed, respecting Catholic tradition for deceased popes. The pontifical household, led by Archbishop James Harvey, arranged for the body to lie in state first in the Clementine Hall of the Apostolic Palace, then in St. Peter's Basilica. On April 4th, the body of John Paul II was carried in solemn procession from the Apostolic Palace to St. Peter's Basilica. 12 pallbearers, the Sediari Pontifici, who had once carried the Pope on the ceremonial sedan chair, bore his body on a red bier. Cardinal Ratzinger led the procession, followed by the College of Cardinals in order of precedence. The Swiss Guard provided an honor escort, their halberds at mournful rest. For the next 3 days, the basilica remained open 24 hours a day as an estimated 2 million pilgrims filed past the Pope's body. They waited in lines stretching for miles through Rome's ancient streets, some standing for up to 12 hours for a few seconds before the catafalque. Italian authorities struggled to manage the unprecedented influx of visitors. The mayor of Rome arranged for water distribution points, mobile toilets, and medical stations along the queue route. "We had prepared for large crowds," said Guido Bertolaso, head of Italy's Civil Protection Agency, "but nothing on this scale." This was not just a state funeral, it was a global pilgrimage. World leaders began announcing their intentions to attend the funeral, creating diplomatic and security challenges. More than 200 heads of state and dignitaries would attend, including US President George W. Bush, the first sitting American president to attend a papal funeral. For the first time, the Vatican invited the President of Israel and representatives from the Islamic world to attend a Pope's funeral. As the Apostolic Palace staff packed John Paul II's personal belongings and prepared his private apartments to be sealed, Cardinal Ratzinger led daily meetings of the General Congregation of Cardinals. These pre-conclave sessions addressed immediate concerns of church governance and finalized funeral arrangements. Behind the closed doors of the Vatican's Synod Hall, the cardinals were also taking each other's measure, quietly considering who among them might be called to succeed John Paul II. Cardinal Ratzinger emerged as the central figure of the interregnum period. As Dean of the College of Cardinals, he would celebrate the Pope's funeral mass and oversee the conclave preparations. His prominence during this period placed him in the spotlight as never before. Many cardinals who knew him only by reputation were seeing him operate firsthand. Ratzinger handled everything with remarkable grace and efficiency, Cardinal Francis George of Chicago later observed. He was not campaigning for anything. He was simply fulfilling his duties. But in doing so, he displayed qualities that many found impressive. His clarity, his humility, his devotion to the Church. The funeral of Pope John Paul II on April 8th was one of the largest in history. Over 4 million pilgrims crowded into Rome, with 1 million gathering in and around St. Peter's Square alone. The Mass was broadcast to an estimated 2 billion viewers worldwide. Giant screens were set up in cities across Poland, allowing Karol Wojtyła's countrymen to participate remotely in the farewell to their national hero. Cardinal Ratzinger delivered the homily, a moving tribute that balanced personal recollection with theological reflection. We can be sure that our beloved Pope is standing today at the window of the Father's house, that he sees us and blesses us, he said, prompting spontaneous applause from the crowd. Throughout the homily, Ratzinger's voice occasionally broke with emotion, revealing the personal friendship behind the formal relationship. During the funeral, a powerful moment captured global attention. As the simple cypress coffin containing the Pope's body rested before the altar, a gust of wind blew through St. Peter's Square, turning the pages of the Book of the Gospels that had been placed upon it. Then the book closed on its own, as if symbolically ending the chapter of John Paul II's papacy. Many pilgrims interpreted this as a divine sign. As the funeral concluded, 12 pallbearers carried the Pope's coffin back into the basilica for burial. John Paul II was interred in the Vatican grottos, in the same tomb that had once held Pope John XXIII before his remains were moved to the main level of the basilica. After his beatification in 2000, with the funeral completed, attention turned to the conclave. 117 cardinals were eligible to vote, though only 115 would participate due to the absence of 2 cardinals for health reasons. They would enter the Sistine Chapel on April 18th, following a 15-day mourning period. Speculation about potential successors filled newspaper columns and television programs worldwide. Vatican experts produced lists of papabili, cardinals considered possible popes, with names like Dionigi Tettamanzi of Milan, Claudio Humes of São Paulo, and Francis Arinze of Nigeria, frequently mentioned. Cardinal Ratzinger was included in these discussions, but many analysts considered him a long shot. At 78, he was 3 years older than John Paul II had been at his election. His reputation as the Church's doctrinal enforcer, he had been nicknamed God's Rottweiler by some critics, seemed at odds with the more pastoral style many cardinals were thought to desire. His German nationality was another perceived obstacle, given historical sensitivities about German leadership in Europe. Furthermore, conventional wisdom held that the cardinals would not choose another long pontificate. After 26 years of John Paul II, many church observers expected the college to select an older, transitional pope who might serve 10 years or less, allowing time for the church to process the legacy of John Paul's lengthy reign. Inside the Vatican, however, the dynamics were more complex. Many of the voting cardinals had been appointed by John Paul II and shared his theological vision. Cardinal Ratzinger, as the late Pope's closest doctrinal advisor, represented continuity with that vision. His performance during the interregnum had impressed many, and while his public image emphasized his role as doctrinal enforcer, those who knew him personally spoke of his gentleness, humility, and theological brilliance. The media portrayed him as stern and rigid, Cardinal George Pell of Australia later recalled, but in person he was shy, kind, and listened carefully to everyone. Many cardinals saw these qualities during our pre-conclave meetings. On the morning of April 18th, the cardinal electors celebrated the Mass for the election of the Roman Pontiff in St. Peter's Basilica. Cardinal Ratzinger, as Dean, was the principal celebrant and delivered the homily. His words seemed to outline a manifesto for the next pontificate. Having a clear faith based on the creed of the Church is often labelled today as fundamentalism, whereas relativism, which is letting oneself be tossed and swept along by every wind of teaching, looks like the only attitude acceptable to today's standards. This stark warning against the dictatorship of relativism struck many observers as unusually pointed for a pre-conclave Mass. Some interpreted it as Ratzinger's candidacy statement, though others noted he had consistently expressed these views throughout his career. Regardless, it framed the conclave's central question. Would the Church continue John Paul II's firm doctrinal approach, or move in a different direction? That afternoon, the cardinals processed into the Sistine Chapel, singing the ancient hymn, Veni Creator Spiritus, Come Creator Spirit. After taking an oath of secrecy, they heard the traditional admonition, Extra omnes, everyone out. And the massive doors were closed and sealed. Only the cardinal electors remained, beneath Michelangelo's imposing fresco of the Last Judgment. The first ballot that evening served mainly as an opportunity for cardinals to put forward names for consideration. According to later accounts, Cardinal Ratzinger received a surprisingly strong showing of around 40 votes, far more than any other candidate, but well short of the 77 needed for election. Black smoke rose from the Sistine Chapel chimney at 8 o'clock, signalling to the waiting crowd in St. Peter's Square that no pope had been elected. By the following morning, April 19th, momentum had clearly shifted toward Ratzinger. On the third ballot, he reportedly received around 70 votes. Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio of Buenos Aires, who would later become Pope Francis, emerged as the main alternative, gathering around 30 votes at most. A fourth ballot was held immediately, and Ratzinger secured the necessary two-thirds majority of 77 votes. At 5:30 in the evening, white smoke rose from the chapel chimney, followed by the joyful ringing of St. Peter's bells. Inside the Sistine Chapel, the newly elected Pope accepted his election and chose the name Benedict XVI, honouring both Pope Benedict XV, 1914 to 1922, who had worked for peace during World War I, and St. Benedict of Nursia, the 6th century founder of Western monasticism. The choice signalled his desire to help Europe rediscover its Christian roots. Cardinal Jorge Medina, Esteves of Chile, the senior cardinal deacon, appeared on the central balcony and delivered the traditional announcement, Habemus Papam, we have a pope. When he pronounced Josephum Cardinalum Ratzinger, cheers erupted from the German contingent in the square, while others reacted with surprise. Few outside the Vatican had expected such a rapid election or such a clear consensus. When Benedict XVI stepped onto the balcony, he appeared momentarily overwhelmed by the moment. The cardinals have elected me, a simple, humble worker in the vineyard of the Lord, he said in Italian. Unlike his predecessor, who had immediately charmed the crowd with his charisma, Benedict came across as reserved and scholarly. Yet his gentle smile and obvious humility won over many in the square. The election of Ratzinger represented both continuity and transition. As John Paul II's theological right hand for over 2 decades, he ensured doctrinal consistency. Yet his different temperament and background, a theologian rather than an actor-turned-pastor, suggested a distinct papal style would emerge. World reaction to the election was mixed. Conservative Catholics expressed delight at the selection of a doctrinal stalwart. Progressive Catholics voiced concern that needed reforms might be further delayed. Non-Catholics viewed the choice through various lenses. Some welcomed his record of interfaith dialogue, while others worried about his previous strong statements on religious relativism. German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder expressed national pride. "It is a great honor for Germany that a countryman has been elected Pope." US President George W. Bush praised Benedict as a man of great wisdom and knowledge. From more liberal quarters came more measured responses, with many adopting a wait-and-see attitude toward the new pontificate. Inside the Vatican, Benedict XVI quickly demonstrated both continuity and subtle change. He kept many of John Paul II's key appointees in place, including Secretary of State Cardinal Angelo Sodano. Yet he brought his own longtime secretary, Monsignor Georg Genswein, into the papal household and began working with a different style than his predecessor. Where John Paul II had been expansive and dramatic, Benedict was precise and professorial. His first public appearances revealed a shy man who seemed uncomfortable with the more theatrical aspects of the modern papacy. Yet when he spoke, his clarity and depth impressed even those who disagreed with his positions. As one Vatican journalist noted, John Paul II showed us how a pope could act. Benedict XVI is showing us how a pope can think. Benedict's installation mass on April 24th contained symbolic elements that indicated his approach. He received the pallium, the woolen stole symbolizing his role as shepherd, in a redesigned ancient form, signaling his interest in traditional Christianity. His homily emphasized his role as a servant of servants, highlighting the humble aspect of the papal office. Following the precedent set by Pope Paul VI in 1963, Benedict chose not to include a coronation in his installation ceremony. The papal tiara, unused since Paul had abandoned it, remained in storage. This continued simplification of papal ceremonies reflected Benedict's focus on the essential spiritual nature of the papal office rather than its worldly trappings. In his first general audience on April 27th, Benedict explained his choice of name. "I wanted to be called Benedict XVI in order to create a spiritual bond with Benedict XV, who led the Church during the turbulent time of the First World War. He was a courageous prophet of peace." He also mentioned his devotion to St. Benedict, calling him a fundamental reference point for European unity and a powerful reminder of the indispensable Christian roots of European culture and civilization. These early days revealed a papacy that would be quieter and more focused on Europe than its globe-trotting predecessors. While John Paul II had been elected at a similar age to Benedict, the new pope clearly did not possess the same physical stamina or natural charisma. Yet his theological depth and clarity of vision suggested a pontificate that might prioritize substance over style. The transition from John Paul II to Benedict XVI marked the end of one of the most consequential papacies in modern history and the beginning of a more contemplative, intellectual pontificate. The Church and the world had grown accustomed to the larger-than-life presence of Karol Wojtyła. Now they would need to adjust to the more reserved style of Joseph Ratzinger. Few could have predicted that this seemingly traditional succession would eventually lead to one of the most dramatic moments in modern Catholic history, Benedict's own resignation in 2013. But in those April days of 2005, as white smoke rose above the Vatican and bells rang throughout Rome, the Catholic Church had completed another peaceful transition of power in an institution that measures its history in centuries. Every papal transition writes a new chapter in the Church's history. The passage from John Paul II to Benedict XVI wrote one of its most poignant. White Smoke is a production of Calaroga Shark Media, portions of which were made with the help of AI narration.